Following a competition among top global technology vendors in 2014, the NFL selected Zebra as its official on-field player tracking provider, introducing its revolutionary next-generation player tracking system, disrupting the status quo in sports data tracking, previously limited to one-dimensional GPS-based monitoring devices and optical tracking systems. With the 2014 launch, Zebra Sports earned the 2015 Sports Business Awards Best in Sports Technology. Not one to rest on its laurels, Zebra Sports continued to push for firsts in 2015 with another truly breakthrough year, leading the charge in continuing to revolutionize tracking technology and next-generation statistics in sports. This past year, Zebra and Wilson successfully led the deployment of the next level of tracking technology, sport tracking, with its introduction of the first ever RFID instrumented trackable football, which created a tough engineering challenge: to embed an active RFID tag inside the ball without affecting its physical integrity. Zebra also reduced the size of its patented RFID tag by more than 50%. Through its partnership with Zebra, the NFL widened the gap between old-school data tracking and Zebra's state-of-the-art sport tracking technology. Zebra Sports achieved another first in 2015 by broadening its product functionality. Because Zebra's system is a true tracking system, providing data in real time with an accuracy of inches, new applications were created for both fans and team operations personnel. In 2015, Next-Gen Stats came to life, driving fan engagement across multiple media platforms, including NFL.com, NFL social media, Microsoft Xbox, CBS and NBC NFL game broadcasts. Zebra also introduced 3 new data tracking modules: Schematic for coaches, Tactics for scouting, and Performance for trainers. Will provide new insights into game planning, drastically decrease the operational load of coaches and scouting staff, and assist trainers in helping players reach peak performance. Another milestone achievement in 2015 was Zebra Sports' successful completion of the largest global deployment of any real-time sport tracking system in the world, fitting all 31 NFL stadium venues in the United States, Wembley Stadium in London, and Aloha Stadium in Hawaii. Zebra tagged and tracked 2,500 plus different NFL players, and collecting more than 180 billion bytes of position data. Zebra also strategically expanded into college football through partnerships with the University of Tennessee, the University of Washington, and Ohio State University, providing the same game day solution it provides the NFL, and setting the foundation for improved operations and enhanced fan consumer experiences. Zebra Sports Solution was selected by the NCAA for deployment during the Fiesta Bowl, the 2015 College Football Playoffs, and National Championship game. By any measure, 2015 was another year of extraordinary firsts for Zebra Sports, forging new ways to engage fans while assisting leagues, teams, and personnel with insightful new data through innovative technology, continuing its mission as the driving force in sports technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome today's moderator, Mr. Abe Madcore, Executive Editor, Sports Business Journal.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everybody. We're thrilled you're here. Great session that we have with Zebra Technologies. Last year, we had a similar session where we looked at what the video showed, some of the RFID technology that Zebra was utilizing in uniforms with the NFL teams. We had Coach Payton and some others. This year, we're moving forward into terms of more sports tracking, as the video again illustrated, tracking of the football, tracking of other pieces of equipment that we will be looking at for both consumers and on the operational side. I don't need to give you their entire bio because they're in the book and you know them, but brief introductions for our esteemed group of panelists. They put together a really good panel representing a number of different facets of the business. Immediately to my left is Perkins Miller, who is Chief Digital Officer and Head of Media Operations at NFL Media. Give it up for Perkins. Our second guest is Matt Sheldon, who is Director of Football Analytics and Research for the Chicago Bears. Next to Matt is Adam Beard, who is Director of High Performance for the Cleveland Browns, and when you hear his accent, you will know he's not from Cleveland. Next to him is Bob Thurman, who is VP of Innovation at Wilson Sporting Goods. We also have former NFL player and who is Global Head of Business Development, Isaiah, for MC10, which he'll explain, is Isaiah Kavzienski. And our final panelist is VP of Data Science at True Media Networks, Mr. Dean Oliver. So a great session. I'm going to ask each one of you. Perkins, let's start with you. Tell us briefly about your role and responsibilities for the audience when it comes to sports tracking.
So at NFL Media and for the NFL operations writ large, we have a team of folks who specialize in working with Zebra, working with our distribution partners like Sportradar, as well as our clubs, in order to take the data that you described, the beaconing on the players, and turn those into stories. And that could be stories that our broadcasters use to make the game more interesting, that our folks who work in science and sport at the clubs can figure out how to learn from how their players are performing on the field of play, or internally, to understand ways that we can make the game better to watch and more fun to be around.
Matt?
Abe, I work directly with the head coach and the GM of the Bears, and we are evaluating the tracking technologies currently, and we see them as really being impactful in 4 areas. One is to the coaching staff, schematically and tactically. 2 would be our strength and conditioning or performance coaches in peaking the player's performance. 3, it would be in our athletic rehabilitation people, maybe shortening the return to play. And then 4, in our player personnel, in our evaluation of players and who we're selecting to be on our team.
So 2 distinct ways of looking at data. Adam, why don't you explain your role and responsibilities and how you're looking at it?
Yeah, sure. Probably pretty similar to Matt in terms of, we're looking at tracking the players and evaluating, schematics and also, the physical outputs. The main thing we're trying to look for is ways to win, and work backwards from the game and making sure that practice equals what we're trying to do on game day.
And Bob, bring about it from the Wilson point of view.
Absolutely. So I'm in charge of product creation for all the Wilson brands. That brings us to the heart of a lot of games, whether it's Major League Baseball or the NFL, with official products usually at the heart of that game. And one of the key aspects from a tracking perspective is a lot of the player tracking data is would be much richer if you were able to track where the ball is, because the ball is very important to the game as well. So developing those connected products is largely a big part of my responsibility.
Isaiah.
So I'm the global head of business development at MC10, and it's a pretty abstract idea, but it's this idea of essentially reimagining conventional, rigid, boxy electronics, allowing them to flex, stretch, and bend. When you can do that, you can tightly couple to the body. Tons of applications. We've built the BioStamp, which we're getting ready to launch soon over the next couple of weeks, as an innovation platform together. Very accurate data capture, physiology on the body, from all around the body. Actual locations on the body with multiple sensors on board, from quantifying motion to muscle activity to heart rate activity to electrocardiographic activity across the board, and being able to sync contextualized data up over time. I think, 8 years in the NFL, I was always being a fringe player. The way I looked at the world was I was trying to find that one, that half step, that 1% of getting better. Because I always felt like I was going to get tossed out of the NFL every single game, right? And being able to find that somewhere, I wanted to dial in the way I trained, the way I looked at my training, in a way that I wasn't guessing anymore. Because in the end, after having 11 surgeries now, I think a lot of that was due to overtraining, constantly guessing on how I was getting ready and preparing for games.
And Dean, finish.
So I work for True Media. It's a software company that really delivers a lot of the data that may come from Zebra, may come from you, all sorts of different resources. We integrate it. We try to tell, it was the concept of telling stories. Well, anytime, whether you're telling a story from the media perspective or telling a story in a draft room, you're telling a story about a player and trying to use as much data as you can and integrating that all together. And with football in particular, player tracking data is a whole new set of data that you've got to put together into information that will create a better decision about a player or demonstrate who to look at more, even if it's not perfect.
So you see how it's touched each of their business. So I'll jump all of you as we start into the panel more broadly. How has it impacted your decision making or your business? How has data analytics impacted your business or decision making?
I could jump in. I think the way we look at the world, we were formed, the idea in which we were really born, in my particular background, is not all hardware is made equal. And when you can change that hardware, you can actually deliver added insight. And that insight can come in the form of raw data that's then filtered to mean whatever you may want it to mean, right? But the ability to actually capture that very accurate data on body through multiple sensors allows for deeper insight, richer data context that actually can really add more color to the picture that we saw behind before we started, and that's a very, very powerful thing, right? One of the things that's a non-starter in the athlete is you cannot have obtrusive wear during gameplay or even practice, right? There's time you use it, you're gonna be able to throw it off. It has to seamlessly be able to capture data, and that is a very, very difficult problem, especially when you're trying to capture physiology.
I think there's also a reality check component of a lot of this. Is we talk about speed and they get a combine speed, but then there's game speed, and I think the potential for capturing those kind of things, and it doesn't eliminate all this discussion about what is a player's game speed, but you can actually go and you can see how fast a player is in different situations in the game, and it ends up a reality check. If you're saying one player is much slower or much faster, the data gives you something that, okay, yeah, maybe they looked faster, but maybe they weren't actually all that much faster. And that reality check, that ground truthing, can be helpful for keeping arguments from going too long in the wrong direction.
And it can help stories, whether you're telling a story to a viewer, whether you're trying to tell a story to your head coach or your team operations, or whether you're trying to tell a story to consumers.
Right. Yeah, and I think technology has been such a critical role, I think, in making sport more easy for everybody to watch and understand. I mean, think about what the yellow line did for the NFL more than a decade ago, where it really anchored people in the context of sport. What does it mean to get a first down? And I think as we look at it, you've heard about it here today, which is, not only does it work at the very granular level, at the player development, player health and safety, and even at the coach level about seeing and how responsive a player is to certain plays and certain defensive strategies. We look at it also through the lens of, well, what can we do to tell the story for our fans better on television? How can you understand how hard it is from a quarterback to throw to an eligible receiver? He has to make split-second decisions. And, ironically, and we actually did a hackathon about 3 weeks ago in San Francisco. And a hackathon is where you bring in this case, about 100 young developers largely. And they, drink Red Bull and Mountain Dew for 24 hours and code. And the assignment was look at pattern recognition and help us understand stories out of the data. And the winner of this group, and they were all bleary-eyed, sort of standing up on stage, had come up with a way to say, we can tell you the probability of a successful pass at the ball snap based on the configuration of eligible receivers and the defensive line.
Is that right? Wow.
And that's just a fascinating piece of evolution. Like, imagine that, does that make the game more interesting if you're able to sort of understand what decision-making the quarterback has to make as he drops back to throw? Now, how soon we can make that a reality is many leaps to the future, but the fact that we are able to bring together people to think through these ideas and say, there are ways to make the game even more exciting than it already is on television by using the data to tell a story and make it showcase how hard it is for some of these players to perform on the field.
One thing we do, jumping on to what you're saying, internally, we do something similar where we use our large data sets to understand the trends in the NFL game, and then we move forward to train both our pro and our college scouting staffs. It's so much of the time you can have a college scout who may be out in his area and not watching a lot of the NFL game. So we find out what the trends are and we try to reverse engineer them into what traits are necessary to be successful at the NFL level. Uh-huh. So you were talking about really the NFL has evolved to a short passing league. And so we do quite a bit of that, evangelizing what the trends are internally.
For player tracking, though, I mean, I'll look at you, Adam, in terms of the amount of data you're able to get on just certain players and being able to try to tell that story in terms of future predictive performance. Where are you seeing the trends in that space?
You know, yeah, there's a lot more data that's been expressed and stuff like that, but I think we just need to answer a lot of questions. Like, without tracking, we've got a lot of subjective opinions. You know, everybody's an expert on Monday. You know, I knew that was going to happen and all that sort of stuff. I think data helps us be more objective and look at the trends in terms of what's going to help win. When I first came to the States, it was interesting that the NFL didn't track anything in game day. And I said to them when I got there, well, what do we do? Like, we're tracking training. Are we aiming to get better at practice or the game? So it is quite foreign for me.
And Bob, you're thinking about it from a different perspective, and where do you see this going in terms of player tracking or even sport tracking?
Well, I mean, you're talking about how did it change our business. You know, we've been motoring along for 100 years now, 75 years with the NFL, and this no ball sports company. And, you know, I'm up here talking with, you know, some pretty high-level guys in the tech world and data world. But what we started finding around 2000, or even a little bit before, we were always interested in data. You can describe sports and performance with data in a lot of different ways. And those tools were really useful to us in designing and developing products. And so we were always tinkering around with this or that. But as electronics and things kind of came to scale, we had a lot more, you know, organizations, individuals coming to us wanting to unlock that data. So they would bring us this big Frankenstein type sensor, and can you stick this in a ball because we want to measure something that's going on in the game. And that happened in a lot of different sports, and we realized that, you know, hey, this is where the world's going. We felt like as a company we could change and become an IoT type company and start offering not only products but services that give toolboxes for these guys to help train athletes better, unlock the game for, you know, for analysts and whatnot. So we see ourselves as a gateway and an enabler. But then we see that on the pro level, and we see pro level, prosumer level, which these guys are when they're training athletes, and then consumers, right? We're competing with video games. We want kids off the couch and out there playing a lot of football or basketball in the driveways across the USA, and how do we bring that same kind of experience to them from an IoT perspective and giving them rich analytics to help them train, but in a gamified way. So a little bit different perspective than what's up here, but, you know, that's where we're going.
And so you're able to take all of this, whether it's now a consumer product, whether it's a baseball, a football, any type of product, integrate it into the player data to tell, we hope, a good story, a better story, a more complete story?
Yes.
And there's no negative to any of this, right? You just
Well, I think that there's a negative in the sense that you have to be, very, very careful to provide context. Because, you know, data in and of itself is just an overwhelming amount of zeros and ones that don't mean anything. And I think that there's where I think a lot of people will confuse data and analysis with insights. And I think what we spend a lot of time is making sure that we take all this data and we provide the right context so you can develop the right insight. Because it's very easy to, you know, as Mark Twain said, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so, you know, you have to be, you know, very, very, I think, careful about how you provide that context and insight.
Isaiah, if they had all this data when you were playing, how would it have impacted you different?
I think Adam said something really good that speaks to the point you just made, which is, you know, you can't improve what you can't measure. And I fully believe that. And, you know, continually guessing on, you know, ideas of training and how you perform not only in the weight room, but also on the field, and quantifying that in a way that can actually give you benefit in an iterative process, right? This is what happened, and this is how I feel. So if you know, as imagine, I'm sure Adam is focused on this in a major way, but, you know, you think about 2 weeks leading up to gameplay and game day, you feel amazing, and you play awesome, you feel amazing. In some ways, you'd like to recreate that last 2 weeks of training, or, you know, X amount of weeks of training, to say, hey, you know, the body's not like the stock market. There's not a wandering path in which it takes. If you treat it in a similar way, it pretty much produces in a similar way. You know, if you look at the entire context of how you train. So being able to put that blueprint together, recreate that to really increase your probability for feeling good again, because that's what it's all about. We all want to feel good, whatever data capture tool that may be for an elite athlete, or for, you know, me now, Joey Bag of Donuts, businessman. It doesn't matter. I want to feel good, right? And I want a pathway in order to get there instead of constantly guessing along the way. So you look back to really, really tell a story of how do you increase the probability to put yourself in the best position, and vice versa. If I have X amount of data that shows, and come game day, I'm talking with a strength coach and my sports science guys, and I understand I don't feel good. Like, you probably want to avoid, and tweak the system. Say, all right, what can I take out? Is this, there's various metrics which you could tweak. Dial that in on. Let's put me in the best position to feel my best. And when I feel good, hopefully I play good.
I can tell you that when I go around the markets, there's always been a resistance sometimes to data or to sell through that data and analytics and information to the top. I'd like everyone to chime in here because you've had to sell it maybe to some broadcasters to weave that into their broadcast. You've had to sell it into maybe a coaching staff that may not have been necessarily bought in. Talk about any points of resistance and how you're able to use the data to help show the benefit. Or there's no resistance.
I think you have to tell players, coaches, or whoever why you're doing it and why you're measuring it. It has to have a specific outcome. For instance, we can measure in the weight room a really heavy squat. So a guy can squat 600 pounds.
Right.
But if you're not developing other areas in terms of the running and handling that, then virtually you're just putting a huge engine into a shopping trolley, like a V8 into a shopping trolley, and expecting that to go faster. You have to have context to what you're measuring.
You might think this is simple, but it's so important. It's the message and how it's communicated. I like to say, a great analytic finding is not going to go anywhere the Monday morning after a tough Sunday night loss, okay? Where you flew halfway across the country back from San Francisco, that's not the right time. And just understanding your audience that I like to teach in threes, so we're not going to have a conversation on this and have more than 3 takeaways. And it might be 1 or 2. So there might be a certain time during the week that you can talk to your head coach or your GM, and where the information will be sticky. And the last thing, and you alluded to it, was provide the context and have a focus. Understand that, hey, we're going to go into this season and we're going to work on these 3 things. And we're not going to shift our focus all the time. And hopefully you can communicate those in a sticky format.
Yeah, I think actually I was up on stage here about an hour and a half ago or something with Shane Battier, who said that he actually was afraid that teams would use numbers to lower his value in negotiation. So you definitely run into that resistance. But I think most of the resistance is this language. It's a language barrier. You're learning a language. A lot of times good data, new data is forcing you to think about concepts that a lot of times coaches have that concept, but sometimes it doesn't quite get there, so you don't want to use the exact language. And then it's just a language barrier, and if people are patient enough, and guys like you guys have to deal with this on a regular basis, it's okay. You can overcome language barriers. Just don't make it like you say on Monday morning. There's timing to do this, and you don't do it right before a game or in game, that kind of stuff.
And I think it's accuracy is important. So I mentioned I think context is incredibly important. That you have to be providing the relevant story and how they can improve upon it, and then the accuracy. And we spend a lot of time, as working with Zebra, and they've done a great job to provide that level of fidelity, so that the data that comes out is something that is predictable and consistent. And because if it's not predictable and consistent, it's not trustworthy. And I think that's where it's really, really important that as you kind of go down the line, that you make sure that you have that level of fidelity. And I think there's where I think you can find your way into darkness again if you're sort of relying on stuff that maybe not consistent week over week.
But it could also be, for all of you, it sounds like there's a theme of simplicity, or keep it simple, especially for the viewer, because you could overwhelm them with all the data that you're capturing with this technology on player speed, separation, but you want to really go in there with a specific message.
Yeah, I mean, I can. You're not going to get somebody really thrilled talking about a change in vector speed when they're trying to eat chips and dip on a Sunday night. I mean, they want to maybe understand, like, well, how much separation did the wide receiver have on coverage? And is that wide receiver, has he been able to maintain that separation all this first quarter? Is that why they've gotten so many first downs? And so, and then if you can find a way to then, frankly, package that right. You got a separation index, and it's easy to digest, and everybody understands what it means. And then if you have that, then you can get into the vernacular, and it becomes part of the story.
What inning are we in terms of this data tracking, player tracking, sports tracking? Are we in the third inning of a 9-inning game?
I was going to say, you don't get a win and loss yet, so you haven't gotten to the 5th inning, that's for sure. Yeah, I was going for about 3rd inning as well. You're certainly going the right way.
I think it's early days. Obviously, all these smart people that are here, we're getting the data to the surface and we're bringing it out in different ways. Like, if we're tracking the football, we're able to measure the inertial motion of that. You get things like throw quality and throw strength, somebody's arm strength. That's another data stream that comes out. There's so much more data that can be pulled out of the game when you even get to smaller and smaller, more micro scales of it. I think it's just, the sky's the limit, so I think it's early in the game.
For the operation, gentlemen, where do you think we are in terms of how much more data can be aggregated and accumulated to tell stories about athletes or performance?
Yeah, I think it can continue to grow. It's just, we've got to come up with good performance questions then to answer.
What can't you analyze right now that you want to know more?
Well, it's coming, obviously, Zebra technology. The more information we get about the game, that's going to be good. But that's an external load. That's just kind of telling us what speeds and velocities and accelerations. That's very mechanical. We're humans, so we need to have a look at that internal load on how players handle that, that load and how they react from it. Because then we can give recovery modalities, or we can change training for the individual or for the groups.
So many of these systems are really tuned towards open field running. And we were talking about American football, 45% of the players don't open field run on every play. So they've got a pretty good handle on open field running. We'd like to see orientation to know when an athlete's running forward or backward. In essence, we're talking about being a passing game. So many of the players are retreating from the line of scrimmage, but facing the line of scrimmage, so they're in a back pedal.
Right.
Those are the areas. Things with how the linemen play. I've had good conversations with Dean Oliver about this, really going on years now. The line play is so intriguing, but these systems, the value is not drawing out that at this time. So those are
So
some
example
of
on the line play, Matt, what would be one specific data point that you would look for?
Well, those are the type of players that they don't do a lot of open field running. So the ability for these guys to be tracked in what their movements are, an offensive lineman in pass protection, or how fast a lineman in a blocking play could take just a few steps. And again, working from the traits, working backwards from what is necessary to be successful, and then saying these are the traits, and here we're going to quantify the elite, and then hopefully be able to develop players up to that standard and select players that are competent in that area.
There was a good example on Mike and Mike the other morning when Olivier Vernon signed the free agent deal. And Mike Golick went through him getting past a lineman. And the Zebra data is going to tell you a lot about, you can do some things on his ability to shed blocks and his speed and getting to the quarterback and everything. But as I watched Golick present this, it was great, because he's talking about the drop step that the guy had to make and where his arm position. So it's showing you not only the power of the positional data, but also the things that we still have to get that are not in that positional data. So it's keeping the world open, of course, for the traditional talent evaluators to see all this stuff, but showing the stuff that also is there that they can now take a little bit more for granted, because the speed is there and those kind of things are there.
Yeah, I'll go like really, really far and say we are at the tip of the iceberg. It's not even close. You think on the field as well as off the field, like, this player doesn't exist 2 hours of the day. This player exists 24 hours of the day. Something that, I know, just even deep insight, just think about off the field is low-hanging fruit is sleep. Think about how much sleep affects the athlete day in and day out. Accurate capture of that sleep quality, huge. The ability to quantify coming back from injury. I'm just giving you a couple examples. Quantify coming back from, say, a knee injury, and having a benchmark before and after. So if you have an ACL injury, how close am I to coming back? The way it's always been done is like, you look good. Let's get you back on the field.
Right.
Try that bad boy out. Instead of, you are 91% coming back based on gait, based on range of motion, based on all these different functional activities that you're capturing real world accurate data to then say, hey, let's actually run you through the paces and see how you perform from where you were before, or compare right and left sides of your body, or do really anything you want.
But coming back from an MCL or ACL, aren't we very close to being able to tell the athlete that they're that ready to get back on the field?
It depends who you talk to.
Okay.
Is there a quantified way to do that right now? Maybe there's snapshots, but functional movement, can you quantify that? And right now, that's just not being done, right? You can take a snapshot at a doctor appointment and have a consultation, but that's one piece. And in some way, that's definitely a fine art. Not that you're going to replace that, but actually having objective data to back up what is actually being seen, the subjective data as well, and marry that together for a richer, deeper picture with more color.
Dean and Bob, anything to add in terms of data analysis that you'd like to see that you could see coming in the future?
I think actually one of the most important aspects is the analysis. You talked about it a little bit with regard to the difference between data analysis and insight, and I actually use similar words. I think we need a framework. I think additional data is going to be great. Trust me, I want the Z direction for where the players are, how high off the ground they are. I would love to have that. The ball stuff is going to be very important. I want that data, but I think the analysis for how it all fits together, all the stuff from the human body, I think we've got a pretty good model. We want a good player on the field, so we know that's valuable. But some of the stuff, we've got to figure out how to make a better team out of some of this data, and that I'm building that framework. I know what data will help. Some of it, I don't know what to do with.
We see a lot of things in the data from a timing perspective, which we think can add to the game. Obviously, release times, decision making times, snap to target times, all those things that are the difference in a game. I believe that from a kind of from a ball perspective, that timing mechanism is actually put into play, and it'll make the data set that much richer. So yes, I just come back to timing specifically.
I know this is looking out a little in the future, but for any of you, and I know there are issues, but let's take away the player issues for now. But how close are we, Perkins, potentially to, if it's Brady going down for the last drive against Denver, and it's an NBC game, or I'm sorry, any network, and they're able to say, Brady's heart rate at the line of scrimmage, or any other type of, say, biometric data on the player, close to that? Will that ever be kind of bubble up? Or are there such individual right issues that won't be out there?
I think it comes back to the idea is, does that help the story? Does it help the drama?
Don't you think
of the
that
game?
could help the story?
I think, well, look, I'll give you an example where it did and it's been used in the Olympics. And I don't actually, we did in the Olympics, but it's in some of the World Cups. But there's a sport called biathlon. And biathlon is a combination of cross-country skiing and accuracy marksmanship. And so these guys, if you don't know it, they put a rifle on their back, they go skate ski for 5 kilometers, and they got to then jump on the ground and hit 3 targets and pop back up. And what they did is they put a heart rate monitor on these athletes, because the ability to reduce your heart rate from it being at 85 or 90% of your max down to 40% of your max was absolutely critical in accuracy of shooting. Right. And so it really helped the drama of the competition. So as the guy dove down and put the rifle down, how fast his heart rate dropped and how accurate was his shooting. So there's an example where it was, and it actually was measurably correlated. And it was interesting and dramatic to watch. Whether or not, I think Tom Brady, we all believe, is probably cool as a cucumber coming out of that pocket. I bet his heart rate goes up about 5 beats when he snaps the ball. So, and I think that might be interesting once or twice, but probably it's pretty consistent play after play after play. And then you've got to, so I think that from my point of view, the stuff that will make the story more accurate, may come much further down the road, where we get some of the biometric and kinesthetic and data coming out of the clothing. So the ability, I think someone mentioned earlier, like, you can't be in the way. We can't put, 5-pound vests on these guys and expect them to tell them they're going to perform. But if you find, there are fibers being developed today that essentially are piezoelectric, or they essentially give feedback in real time, can tell you all the activity that the muscle groups are making in real time. And that maybe lead us to some really interesting discoveries about, what's really happening out there in the field. So I think it's maybe more down the line, if I had to guess. Okay. That had to do more with, we get more wearable, and we take the quantifiable self and the wearable come together with an ease of use and wear, then you're going to kick out another level of data.
As we end up here, let's all just kind of jump off that, if we could, look to the future in terms of what you could see out there. Isaiah, you're chomping there.
Well, I want to add to that. I look at the capturing any of these analytics as you have performance metrics, and then you have unique media content engagement plays, and They may or may not be the same. I think the battle is really won as this performance piece. The player has to say, can this optimize my performance or in some way minimize my risk of injury? And really winning that battle of like, there's value as a player to use this. If my body is my business, I want to make that business run as best as it possibly can with the help of the right people in place around that. So there's just kind of this buy-in of like, all right, this is making me a better player, and I understand I want to play better, longer, and I want to make more money, take care of my family, right? And you get this kind of groundswell with that. The idea of then capturing data during actually live gameplay is not that crazy, right? Because the value is already understood there, and if the actual data collected is fairly agnostic, heart rate is fairly agnostic, that was the example, then great. And would that drive engagement in a crazy way? 100%. Like, I think it's, without a doubt, I would love to see Tom Brady's heart rate, 30 seconds left in the game, balls on the 20-yard line going in. I would love to see that nonstop. I'd love to see more metrics around that. Obviously they're willing to give, but there's an engagement piece of that. Like, it's like fantasy football times 10 as you start to build that level of engagement.
I agree with what you're saying, Isaiah, and so much of it comes to making these things in compelling, digestible bites. Yeah. And one thing I disagree too, you were a heck of a special teams player. So I used to coach in St. Louis. We had great battles with you in the division, but no, that's what's most important. And then optimizing not only the player performance, but your processes. How can you optimize your player selection? How can you optimize in your return to play? How can you optimize in all these things? And so it's just a matter of taking this large amount of data, finding the value, and staying away from mountains of data with molehills of insight.
Look to the future. What else? Dean, what do you think consumers want out of some of this data points? To Isaiah's point, do they want some of those?
New fantasy stats. Yeah.
Could be a whole new fantasy games around
Absolutely.
those things.
I think there's going to be a whole, I think we can come up with all sorts of new fantasy sets for positions that have not really been measured. I mean, all the Darrelle Revis world, I mean, those guys, and just denying, essentially clogging the passing lanes. I mean, that sort of thing, if we can add more to that conversation, because some of the players, they've rebelled against, oh yeah, I didn't get the touchdown, but I ran 87 yards to the one. And like, okay, people were upset because I didn't get the touchdown. I think we can add a few more meaningful statistics to it, and the consumer fantasy certainly is going to be interested by some of these, and it's going to change the game. So for some of the people who are already at the top and winning, they may be a little bit disappointed. Now they got to figure out a new stat, but for a lot of other people, it's going to be interesting.
Bob or Adam?
So yeah, for the future, obviously, as I was talking about, kind of where we're involved, in different sports, but from a pro level, as we're unlocking and enabling this kind of data for these guys to make decisions, we're also trying to learn where we can help consumers and also people that are training to be the next, Tom Brady of the world to get better. And I think that's where we're spending a lot of time now, understanding, at least from, throwing mechanics and things like that. What is it, where are deficiencies that can be worked on, throwing medium routes, to the right side, have a certain amount of timing, their decision-making ability is a little off. That translates to Sunday. It makes them a better quarterback under pressure, and that's what, separates the good from the great. And so it's just building tools, unlocking more data that helps athletes play better. That's what our mission is as a company.
You make a great point, because Isaiah mentioned earlier about sleep time and how pivotal that is to performance. You just said looking at little learnings from either throwing or any other element that you've learned or learnings that you can share with the audience that surprised you from any of the data points?
Well, I used to be a quarterback, wasn't a very good one, didn't make it to the league, but I was always obsessed with, with the spiraling and tumbling motion of a football. My background is aerospace engineering, so we have learned a lot of things in the flight of a ball and understanding what rotation and how much spin a quarterback gets on it. And we're hearing a lot of these gurus talk about, like somebody like Brady that plays in a fairly windy stadium, he gets over 600 or 700 RPMs of rotation on the ball, and that's why he's kind of an accurate
600 RPMs of rotation on the ball.
Those little insights. So now you can start to build off of those things. We can't measure that now, but now that somebody like Adam or somebody like, okay, we need to work on mechanics that'll produce that kind of rotation. Rotation makes a more stable ball, and the ball cuts to the air, and you get to the target much faster and score more touchdowns, ultimately.
I think it's extremely compelling what you guys are doing with Wilson, just in the fact that the hash marks are different from the college to the NFL game. So understanding the velocity of the ball to complete the pass in the NFL, and then translating that to what the passes are and where the spots are in the college game could be really helpful and something that I think is pretty exciting.
Thank you.
As a viewer, I shouldn't tell this in front of Perkins, but I get incredibly frustrated as an NFL diehard that I think the first down line can be so subjective and arbitrary in terms of where that ball is placed. And someday there has to be some sort of technology device that actually can measure exactly, was that a first down? Because you have one ref coming in from one side and another coming in from other, but that's my soapbox and I'm done with it. So I know you guys all will work on that. But looking ahead, y'all, a lot of young people in this audience, don't you think, obviously, an incredible future for data analytics in terms of, I mean, wouldn't you encourage them to get into that space or get into that field?
I have a freshman in college. He is majoring in data analytics. That's how strongly I believe in it. So I think it's a field for the future, and I can't say enough good things about it.
If you own a team, I would love to own a team one day. If you own a team, it is crazy for you to not want to put your players, the players that are on your team that you analyzed and you're like, this is my squad. If you don't want to make them feel as good as they could possibly feel come game day, that's crazy. And the ability to be able to try to dial that in the best way you possibly can should be, a given across the board. And it's going to continue to be a given across the board. Europe's already adopted in a major way with the technology as it stands right now. It's only going to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And quite honestly, that's a very, very powerful thing. Make the squad I have feel as best they possibly can come game day.
Do you think in Europe they're ahead of us in terms of some of this?
As far as early adoption, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Adam, what do you think? I mean, you've been a lot in rugby and other parts of the world.
As far as adoption?
Yeah, adoption, yeah, absolutely. Like our guys wore heart rates and GPS for probably the last 6 years. So, and then it was mandatory for us. They had to wear that in training and the game day, so it helped a lot.
But to Isaiah's point, your ownership at the Browns is making a concerted effort. I mean, you're a new employee. You said you've been able to add to your staff. These are all new positions. To his point, there has to be ownership investment from above, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You just have a look in, a sport like, say, Formula One. The pit crews went from 3 or 4, and now they've got 9, 10 specialist things, and they've gone from 68 seconds changing tires to 2 seconds. You're not changing the sport, you're just making it more efficient. So,
last word. Anybody going to give if we bring together this panel in 2018, in 2 years, what will be the one big difference in terms of data analytics or sports tracking that we will see? Less than 5 seconds each. I'll start with Dean. Sorry, buddy.
Less than 5 seconds. We'll get the vertical data on a lot of the tracking.
Vertical data?
Yep.
Isaiah?
Broader buy-in on the value of dialing this in to make your team the best team it possibly can.
Bob?
Richer visualizations on broadcast.
Visualizations on broadcast. Adam?
just more specialization now that we've got game data.
I'd say just more organization in the entire platform, more third-party validity, more ground truth finding, and just more organization.
Perkins, you get the last word, my friend.
Well, I think the point on fantasy was a good one. I think that there's a whole level of sort of insights and fun that people can have with this data that we just have barely scratched the surface on so far.
Well, great panel. Each of these gentlemen are going to be around if you have any questions, but I want to thank Zebra and I want to thank the panelists, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ed.
All right.
Thanks, buddy.
Good seeing you.